Chapter 14, The Field of Mind Theory. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed. To know that what is impenetrable to us really exists, manifesting itself as the highest wisdom and the most radiant beauty, which our dull faculties can comprehend only in their most primitive forms. This knowledge, this feeling, is at the center of true religiousness. In this sense, and in this sense only, I belong in the ranks of devoutly religious men. Quote by Albert Einstein. The earth and myself are of one mind. Quote by Chief Joseph. I mean that if the active mind of a man does communicate with other active minds, even on rare occasions, it could do so only by the transfer of some form of energy from mind to mind directly. Likewise, if the mind of man communicates with the mind of God directly, that also suggests that energy in some form passes from spirit to spirit. It is obvious that science can make no statement at present in regard to the question of man's existence after death, although every thoughtful man must ask that question. But when the nature of energy that activates the mind is discovered, as I believe it will be, the time may yet come when scientists will be able to make a valid approach to the study of the nature of a spirit other than of a man. Quote by Wilder Penfield. As we pointed out in an article we wrote for the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology on the meaning of transpersonal, some metaphysical perspectives, 1971. Those working toward the development of a science of consciousness find that one of the major difficulties in states of consciousness research is that there is no satisfactory vocabulary. It is necessary to use Sanskrit words or to create totally new words or to use words which we are already familiar and define them by their usage so that they have specific new meanings. Transpersonal is such a word. Two kinds of qualities are beings, personal and transpersonal, with different characteristics, are said to be perfectly integrated in a realized being, such as one as the guru of Babe Ram Dass may have been, Ram Dass, 1969. Whatever uncertainty or inner conflict we may feel about the nature of personal and transpersonal roles usually revolves around problems associated with a paradox, being in a world, but most of the world. No wonder, for many teachers have said that such an integrated personal and spiritual nature, personal and transpersonal, is the ultimate, or at least penultimate, condition of being. Goes 1955, Bailey 1934, and Rama Krishna 1952. In Chapter 10, we spoke of Wittgen's idea of field impedance dependence and extended that idea to include not only the external environment, field 1, but also the internal environment inside the skin, field 2, and inside the central nervous system and brain and spinal cord, field 3. We suggested that in all these fields, it is necessary to develop a measure of independence. Such independence facilitates a kind of joy. It accompanies self-actualization. We also pointed out that information can reach us from levels and by communication channels normally called non-sensory. This non-sensory information was called extrasensory by J.B. Rhine, 1937. Having talked of those things and outlined the three fields in Figure 5, it is now possible to construct a similar diagram that would include 4 fields in which it is useful to develop field impedance. This diagram, Figure 17, Green and Green, 1970, can be interpreted to include the basic field impedance features of Figure 5 and, in addition, to suggest in a theoretical or hypothetical sense the existence of additional fields, in each of which we can become aware. Figure 17 might be called the anatomy of the psyche. The figure was first sketched in 1963 for a psychology course called Personality Functions that I taught at University of Chicago. The purpose in constructing it was to clarify the similarities and differences between the psychological systems of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. To wit, Freud limited his concepts to physical, emotional, and mental levels of the diagram E1, E2, E3. At one point, with what seems to us great insight, he noted that as far as the human psyche was concerned, he was working only in the basement. Jung, on the other hand, concerned himself with all levels of the diagram in his psychological commentary to W.Y. Evans Wendt's 1957 book, The Tibetan Book of the Dead, with which figure 17 is quite consistent with its many transpersonal levels of consciousness. Jung wrote, "For years, ever since it was first published, the Bardo Todal has been my constant companion, and to it I owe not only many stimulating ideas and discoveries, but also many fundamental insights." In 1970, the original diagram was elaborated for the section of transpersonal psychology, which we organized at the annual meeting of the Association of Humanistic Psychology. The diagram now includes not only Freudian and Jungian domains of discourse, but also has room for various Eastern and Western metaphysical systems. It is also useful for the discussion of parapsychological ideas. In using such a diagram, it is worth remembering again that the map is not the terrain, the name is not the thing. With that caution in mind, one can view figure 17th as a proposed model of substance, perception, and action. Each structural line represents three things. First, a conceptual boundary between substances organized in different ways or of different kinds. Second, and conceptual boundary between perceptions of different kinds. And third, a conceptual boundary between different kinds of possible actions. As a representation of many, if not most, the world system of occult physics, the basic feature of figure 17th is a concept of energy and a related field theory remarkably similar to that of modern physics. Namely, there is one primary energy from which everything else is constructed. Further, in psychophysics, especially of the kind proposed by Gustav Fechner, it is postulated that the elaborated structure of the one basic energy includes not just physical substance, but also emotional substance, mental substance, and other more rarefied materials, and in that the human being, and only in the human being so far as our planetary life is concerned. All these materials are brought together. The early Greeks taught this union of the substances symbolized by earth, water, fire, or air, and ether was what made man the microcosm. In him, they said, were found all the materials of the macrocosm, the universe. Hall, 1947. The individual in figure 17th is represented by the vertical cylinder that tapers at top and bottom and then is abruptly cut off. This being cut off is meant to indicate the existence of an open system, implying that there is more structure if we knew how to diagram it, both above and below. At least the most represented teachers in all ages and cultures say the system is open. The major structural features inside the cylinder of a human psyche are identified as the brain and nervous system, the lotus and the jewel. The major perceptual features are the conscious and the unconscious. The unconscious is comprised of two subdivisions, the subconscious and the supersubconscious. As shown, the numbers are at the right and the psyche represent the traditional seven major energy states or levels of conscious awareness in the most advanced realized beings represented by Buddha and Christ in the East and in the West. Most people, however, are usually aware only of the limited realm inside the balloon-shaped figure labeled conscious. The words personal and transpersonal refer to levels and energies. Roughly speaking, personal includes physical through mental levels, E1 through E3, and transpersonal extends from the institutional level through the entire superconscious range from E4 through E7. Note that the conscious covers only a fraction of the area of the psyche in levels E1, E2, E3, thus implying that usually we are aware only to a limited extent of physical, emotional, and mental events. Physical events in level E1 are divided into dense physical and etheric physical in order to account for the pranas of yoga, the psychokinetic energies of parapsychology, the ectoplasm of mediums in the spiritualistic tradition, the bioplasmas of Russian researchers, and the hypothesized healing energies of those who heal by touch, by laying on of hands. The outline of the brain at the bottom of the drawing represents brain and nervous system and is supposedly constructed of both dense physical and etheric physical parts. This double composition is an essential feature since it is the etheric physical, the substance said to be responsible for psychokinetic events, that is supposed to be transducing agent that allows the pranic organs of perception and action, the seven major chakras of Eastern metaphysical systems, to interact with the neural machine delineated in Western neuroanatomy and neurophysiology. As mentioned before, until direct existential awareness verifies to us the existence of such energies and structural arrangements as we are here outlined, their existence can only be inferred from parapsychological data and from the reports of mystics and occultists from various cultures who claim to have experienced or observed those normally unconscious realms of the psyche. Without stopping to justify each line of the diagram, it is useful to itemize some of the general concepts as follows. Each of the seven levels is supposed to be a level of substance. The jewel is thought of as the spiritual essence or monad of a psyche and exists as a form of substance. Aurobindo says the jewel is the part of the substance of supermind, and it is this level to which he referred when he said that if one were embarrassed by the word spirit, then think of spirit as the subtlest form of matter. But if one is not embarrassed by that word, then one can think of matter as the densest form of spirit. Between levels E1 and E7, then, are merely differing grades or densities of matter, or isotopic analogies of matter. The entire environment outside the psyche, E1 through E7, is called the planetary field of mind. The planetary field of mind is thought of as legendary being of esoteric religion, in whom we live and move and have our being. Like beams of light, the energies of the various levels and their subdivisions can penetrate the same space at the same time. There are no levels in the sense of up and down. There are only kinds of energy and all kinds of interpenetrated by one another. In the human frame, according to A.T. Barker, 1923, all levels are conjoined and humans are the only creatures to exist in all energy dimensions. Obviously, we do not have the exact words for this, nor is this the place to discuss the ramifications of this idea of a spectrum of substances and additional dimensions, but some outstanding references in which both theory and experience are discussed include Bailey, Barker, Blavatsky, Castaneda, Evan Wentz, Govinda, Hall, Levi, Long, Myers, Ramdas, Ramakrishna, Shaw, Steiner, Tart, and Teilhard de Chardin. Most of these can be obtained from any bookstore carrying metaphysical works. The question arises, if these energies exist, why haven't scientists discovered them with their instruments? The answer generally given is very exact, whether right or wrong. The energies of levels E2 through E7 have not been detected with scientific instruments because these instruments have no parts above the E1 level. Humans have all the parts and can therefore detect a greater spectrum of energies. Instruments are made of minerals and lack the transducer components needed for detection of E2 through E7 energies. In other words, living beings are coupled to the cosmos better than scientific devices, which are, after all, quite limited tools. The dense physical is divided into solid, liquid, and gas, and everyone knows, and the esoteric physical is said to be of four sorts. Household electricity is the densest, and there are three other or more rarefied ethers. None of these is the hypothesized ether of Victorian physics, which was the supposed vibratory medium for light waves, just as air is the vibratory medium for sound waves. On the contrary, these ethers are said to be substances in the same way that electricity and light are substances. Some psychics and mystics claim that the physical aura they see around the human body is composed of these energies. Number 5, the balloon that represents consciousness is tapered in its extension through the brain and spinal cord, implying that a large fraction of the nervous system is unconscious. It is, of course, a basic observation that much of the neural machinery of humans is located normally in unconscious sections of the nervous system. Number 6, the E2 and E3 energies, emotional and mental, extend beyond the E1 domain or physical in accordance with the data from parapsychology. As an aside, it is interesting to note that our food has certain emotional and mental effects according to this theory, because it has substances in it from many levels in addition to the physical. This is one of the reasons for vegetarianism in many Eastern religions. Number 7, the lower part of the cylinder is drawn with heavy lines to indicate that the individual has a tough barrier that blocks direct interaction with the planetary field of mind at personal levels, physical, emotional, and mental. Number 8, the consciousness is divided from the subconscious by a thin line to indicate that the barrier to awareness is particularly tough. In some people, the barrier is tough than in others, but anyone who can remember a dream or can become aware of hypnagogic imagery has penetrated this barrier. The barrier to the unconscious can be penetrated spontaneously in many places from E1 to E4. So people sometimes unexpectedly and uncontrollably become aware of the contents of their own physiological, emotional, mental, and transpersonal selves. Beginner trips beyond the barriers are generally into their own normally unconscious levels and not into the planetary field of mind body, the heavy line in domains E1 through E3. 9. If the tougher barrier, the heavy line between personal and subconscious and the planetary field of mind is penetrated, there's often an influx of energies that are felt to be representative of the emotions and thoughts of people at a distance, and the person becomes temporarily psychic. Psychism is conscious awareness of information coming directly into the psyche without passing through the usual sensory neural systems that project into the sensory areas of the brain. How can direct perception occur? Again, right or wrong, a simple answer is given by yogis. Perception takes place primarily in the etheric physical. The substance can be agitated by energy from any other level. The coupling of dense physical nerve fibers to etheric physical appears to be relatively strong, while the coupling from other energy levels to the etheric physical is progressively weaker from E2 through E7. Number 10, these barriers to other levels of consciousness, we may call them energy thresholds, are insisted upon by existentially developed persons of every religion and every major psychological system that we know. Those who have not experienced the puncturing of these barriers have not risen above the energy thresholds generally deny that any field of energy outside their own consciousness can influence them, except through the central nervous system, of course. But this ignorance results from having a limited existential experiential base. If most people were colorblind, those who could see colors would be hard put to describe what the sensation was like. But the blindness of the majority would not change the experience nor the certainty of it one whit in those who had it. Number 11, the conscious balloon is widest at the emotional level because that seems to describe the average human. That is, the average person is more consciously aware of his own self emotionally than physically or mentally. Number 12, breaking the heavy barrier to consciousness in E2 develops a kind of psychism called instinctual intuition. But according to yogis of all traditions, a higher kind of intuition exists at E4. The tunnel experience reported by several of our college students in the Theta training program has been experienced by people all over the globe. It has often been interpreted in the West by symbolizing the person's movements through the birth canal into the physical world. But as represented by the tube at the top of the conscious balloon, where it connects with the lotus, it symbolizes the tunnel or canal leading into the spiritual world. The tunnel experience of any individual will depend on his level of awareness, which may fluctuate in correspondence with the outer inner aspects of his life. It is presumably here that the biblical injunction, ye must be born again, has significance. Number 13, in the Oriented Lotus represents the part of the structure, the psyche that is immortal, while the jewel is the eternal being. The lotus plant was used as a symbol because it grows in the earth, the physical, rises up through the water, the astral plane, E2, and most of E3, into the air and blooms. In Zen, this flower has been called the true self. Some Tibetans call it the rainbow body. Aurobindo calls it the true psychic being within the heart. The Ira Progroff, 1969-1970, refers to the deep level of self that can be reached by going down the inner well. Down the well, of course, represents passing through the tunnel, E4, and it means going deep within. The tunnel or well is called in Sanskrit the Antakarana, or path. In Christian mysticism, this path has been called Jacob's ladder. See Genesis 28:10-17. In China, this path was called Tao. To many people who have studied the Chinese Tao, that path was thought to be metaphorical and to mean the path to follow through life. That is, how to behave as a moral human being, but in the highly developed Tibetan psychophysiological system, this morally correct path is a path of substance, a literal structure of substance, sometimes called the causal body, in each person's psyche that connects him as a personal entity with his own transpersonal being. Number 14. A region transcending personal boundaries is indicated in the upper half of the diagram, levels E4 through E7. These higher levels are not separated with solid lines from the planetary field of mind, but are bounded with dashed lines. These openings are meant to represent a free exchange of energies, E4 to E7, linking each person with universal rather than cosmic nature, which is said to be limited to levels E1 through E3, and with the transpersonal levels of every other person. It is said that all humans are brothers and sisters because at transpersonal levels of the unconscious, each person is inseparably part of one being. Perhaps this is the basic idea in the phrase, man is made in the image of God. This possibility may not be recognized if a person has not gone through the tunnel, has not been reborn in spirit. In the words of Christian mystics, Ira Progoff says that those who go down the well become aware of the deeper levels of their being and become aware of and unified with the rest of life. Perhaps these general ideas are what Christ referred to when he said, I am Son of God, and ye are my brethren. The physicist we referred to in another chapter, who went through the tunnel and saw himself standing as an ordinary figure with another brilliantly luminous figure of himself balanced upside down on top of his head, was seeing an image of the personal self with the transpersonal self balanced above it. Through that image, he became aware of the transpersonal section of himself that, in a way, was himself, except that it was luminous, was upside down, and radiated so much light that it seemed to be more than he could bear. One is reminded of a biblical phrase, as above, so below. And like a tree reflected in a lake, the image is upside down. To Don Juan, it is the world of ordinary awareness that is upside down. Interestingly, this concept corresponds to some of the ancient myths in which the tree of life is upside down. with its roots in heaven. Again, a paradox, but by shifting from a personal to a transpersonal frame of reference, all such paradoxes are seen to be resolved as mere artifacts of personal perception. This concept, interestingly enough, was an important part of the sorcerer's explanation given by Don Juan at the end of Tales of Power. At this point, we trust it is clear that each one of the lines of the structure in the diagram represents a boundary between different kinds of awareness and/or different kinds of substances, and that the earth, water, fire, and air of levels E1 through E4 identify different substances which correspond to analogous parts of the psyche at different levels. As already indicated, a significant distinction is made between two major domains, level E1 through E3, and levels E4 through E7. The former domain represents the realm of the personality, the being that originates in the womb and lasts until death, while the latter domain, the structure from the lotus upwards to the jewel, represents the realm of the true entity, a being that develops by repeatedly extending itself into personal life to obtain experience. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead and some of the other world scriptures, after death or shedding of the physical body, a period of time is spent in emotional and mental bodies until a second death takes place and the being passes into transpersonal levels. Eventually, through desires for additional experience, we can put it that way, it obtains another opportunity to live as composite structure and is reborn as a personal separate being. The lotus is said to be the reflection of the jewel, and both slowly change as each lotus goes through thousands of different personal experiences. It is believed in the Buddhist lands that eventually Gautama, the Buddha, could remember several hundred of his lives. Be that myth or not, Dr. Ian Stevenson has recently presented persuasive evidence of 20 children who seem to remember clearly detailed experiences of another life in a short time before the present one. He was able to identify and check the accuracy of the experiences or happenings they related. Stevenson, 1966 through 75. Regardless of myth and research, unless a person has a sense of conviction within himself or herself, the idea of reincarnation is merely an idea. Nevertheless, from a rational point of view, the idea has some useful characteristics. For one thing, the reincarnation theory makes it possible for people who believe in justice to understand why it may be that some babies are born blind or deformed, while others have healthy bodies. Aurobindo says it is well in his discussion of karma and rebirth. Each being reaps the harvest of his works and deeds. This is the law and chain of karma. It gives a meaning to the total force of our existence, nature, character, action, which is absent from other theories of life. A man's past and present karma must determine his future birth and its happenings and circumstance. To us, religiosity and religion are not the same thing. Religiosity means being sentimentally religious, personal rather than transpersonal. We hypothesize that true religion involves awareness of the transpersonal. For those who feel that religion is unnecessary, it is useful to note that according to the theory, we must conform to certain energy rules in order to develop direct awareness of universal nature. Nothing could be simpler than that old idea, nor more modern. The moral track that leads to awareness of the new sphere of Teilhard de Chardin, 1959, and the ethical conformities needed for becoming self-aware in Tibetan Buddhism expresses the same idea. The energies of levels E5 through E7 have not been named by us in Figure 17 because no satisfactory words exist in English unless we use Aurobindo's overmind, which seems to involve energies of E4 and E5 and supermind, roughly E6 and E7. As mentioned before, W.Y. Evan Wentz was told by his Tibetan teacher that levels E4 and E7 are called the void because they cannot be explained in verbal language, but can only be experienced. The way to gain such experience was to follow the path, literally constructing through aspiration and visualization a path of substance at the level of the causal body of figure 17, thus making conscious contact with the superconscious self. It is maintained that eventually the personality, the lotus, and the jewel become unified, and the fully integrated person, man or woman, can exist consciously on all levels at the same time. In the Tibetan tradition, if a physical body is retained after full consciousness has been attained, then the perfected human, the bodhisattva, works in the world to speed the evolution of consciousness in the race. If the physical body is not retained, by various teachers, the perfected individual, who now has certain universal awareness, moves to a series of developmental levels which lie beyond the jewel. The completely integrated and realized being develops through the voluntary control of subjective energies. The lotus and the jewel bodies are present in partially integrated humans all the time, according to Oriental traditions, but we are usually not aware of this until we voluntarily direct our personal energies inward, upward in the diagram. In esoteric traditions, the basic source of energy in humans is through a power center in the subtle body, the etheric template of the physical body. As mentioned before, this energy is called Kundalini in yogic tradition. In both the integral yoga and Tibetan Buddhism, it is maintained that all energy in every organ is an expression of Kundalini. Some writers have acquainted Kundalini with sex energy, but the highest teachers maintain that sex is merely the usual way in which this energy is felt and expressed. If the energy is not used exclusively in personal levels, but also is focused towards awareness in the lotus levels through meditation, there will ensue an activation of specific chakras, etheric organs of the body, which are especially sensitive to superconscious grades of matter. Perhaps these facts are the reasons the world's religions have been much concerned with sex, even though this is not generally understood by religious leaders. The modern tendency to discard ideas of self-regulation, especially self-regulations relating to sex, is likely, in this view, to interfere with transpersonal self-actualization. For anyone who wants to experiment with energies, a 2 or 3 month effort to direct Kundalini to the lotus level and away from sex is usually educational. Awareness, it is said, goes where the energy is directed. But as the energy, the personal power builds up, it becomes more and more difficult to control, and large sudden changes in consciousness often ensue, both subconscious in the Freudian sense and superconscious in the Jungian sense. More will be said about this subject in the next chapter, but a book could be written on the psychophysiology of creativity and the psychophysiology of morals. On the One Path, Chapter 15, Mind Training, Hypnosis, and the Development of Psychic Powers. On the One Path, he becomes proficient in black magic, which is only the developed powers of the personality, subordinated to the selfish purpose of a man whose motives are those of self-interest and worldly ambition. On the other path of white magic, he subordinates his personality, working always in the light of the soul with the soul in all forms, and laying no emphasis upon the ambitions of the personal self. Clear discrimination of these two paths reveal what is called in some occult books that narrow razor-edged path which lies between the two. Quote, the Tibetan. In search for control over normally unconscious psychological and physiological processes, many people have turned to so-called mind training programs of various sorts. These programs are related to the self-regulation training programs described in earlier chapters of this book, but they differ in certain important respects. In this chapter, we would like to make clear these distinctions and also to point out the hazards inherent in some of the current popular programs offering the development of psychic powers. Almost all of the popular commercial mind training programs use a heavy dose of hypnotic programming. It may not be called hypnosis, and in fact, it may be vehemently denied by instructors, but nevertheless, many of the courses use hypnotic techniques that are right out of the book. We have not personally taken one of these courses in order to experience it, but the Attorney General of the state of Kansas sent us an instructor's manual from one of these 4-day classes and asked for our evaluation. The hypnotic nature of the procedures was obvious. As an example, 12 times in a 4-day course, the instructor programmed his trainees with the following statements before bringing them out of a state of suggestion, achieved by hypnotic countdown. Quote, "You will continue to listen to my voice. You will continue to follow instructions at levels of mind, including the outer conscious level. This is for your benefit. You desire it, and this is so." End quote. Correspondents from other states have told us that instructors in commercial mind training courses claim that no one who goes through their course comes out the same. That is not to be wondered at. After a few days of programming during which the trainee is in a suggestive state of mind of the time, it is almost certain that behavioral and perceptual changes will occur. The changes may not last in every case, but for a period of time. Graduates do not seem the same to themselves and often seem different to friends. Alice and I wrote an article criticizing the commercial mind training programs for lack of responsibility to their customers. Green and Green, 1973a. Immediately, we began receiving two kinds of letters, one strongly disagreeing with us and the other strongly agreeing. One woman said that she had suffered from psychosomatic disease for more than 20 years, had been treated by internists and a psychiatrist, had spent about $25,000 with no positive result, and finally had achieved freedom from those diseases within 3 weeks as a result of taking a $200 mind training course. In addition, her husband had been cured of an ailment that had bothered him for many years. How dare we criticize something so valuable? On the other hand, a woman wrote that after her husband had taken the course, one of his imaginary psychic advisors unexpectedly began speaking to him without being asked. The advisor explained that he, the advisor, was God and that for spiritual reasons the wife also must take the course. When she refused to do this, God told him to get a divorce. She and her teenage sons were unable to influence her husband. He also developed some other peculiarities. In desperation, she wrote for advice. The article referred to above is especially germane to independence in the field of mind, so we exert its essential features here before turning to the topic of medical hypnosis. 1. Through hypnosis and through various training programs, including biofeedback, many persons can become aware of normally unconscious processes. 2. Awareness of normally unconscious processes is sometimes accompanied by spontaneous and sometimes volitional ESP phenomena. 3. Commercial mind training courses promising ESP powers are using hypnosis as major method and advertising to the contrary. Subjects are not necessarily in alpha brainwave state. 4. Commercial mind training teachers generally deny that they use hypnosis, and by denying or ignoring the risk associated with hypnotic programming, are inducing in some persons a form of paranoid neurosis or psychosis, often related to obsession or possession. 5. Hypnotic programming for ESP bears the similarity to some of the methods used for development of trance mediumship, especially the possession by spirits of low-grade mediumship. 6. Awareness of normally unconscious processes can be safely taught under the guidance of a counselor without hypnotic programming by methods which allow each person to develop according to his own inner needs. 7. Mind training procedures should be voluntary, modified by those interested in the subject to eliminate psychic hazards. If this is not done, government agencies may summarily ban many research and training programs that otherwise, if carefully developed, might become valuable adjuncts to our education and health systems. Number 8. The major problems are to determine what techniques are safe as well as efficient for the extension of awareness. B, to establish standards of qualification and responsibility of teachers. And C, to offer the benefits of awareness training programs to the public through nonprofit institutions. Many psychologists in the last few years have become interested in research possibilities that a few years back were considered beyond the realm of science, namely voluntarily control of normally unconscious psychological and physiological processes. The first medical approaches to the subject in the West, starting in about 1910, sprang from the researches and developments of autogenic training and psychosynthesis, beginning with Johannes Schultz in Germany, 1959, and Roberto Acciajuoli in Italy, 1965, respectively. At about the same time, Edmund Jacobson was beginning to develop in the United States his training program, which came to be known as progressive relaxation, 1938. In other parts of the world, new interpretations of yoga were developing, such as integral yoga of Aurobindo. His synthesis of yoga, for instance, is concerned with a program for enhancement of unconsciousness and for controlled transformation of normally unconscious processes, 1955. The newest development along this line of self-regulation of mind and body, perhaps the most applicable to Westerners in general, has resulted from research in the area of biofeedback training. The programs mentioned above deal with one's power to modify and control through volitions one's own mental, emotional, and physiological states without hypnotic programming by another person. And in all these developments, except perhaps progressive relaxation, which deals primarily with problems of muscle tension. These considerations seem to have especially important meaning today because we are bombarded by newspaper advertisements of entrepreneurs who, for a fee, will develop psychic powers in us through hypnosis. It is denied that hypnosis is the technique employed because hypnosis is a bad word. Instead, it is called conditioning, programming, brainwave training, alpha training, but nevertheless, it is hypnosis. While the professionals agree, though they do not always agree on how hypnosis works, Hilgard, 1965, Gill and Brenman, 1959, the countdown induction procedure used in commercial mind training programming is classical hypnotic technique. Hypnosis is an extremely powerful tool for control of physiological and psychological states. It is well known that through hypnosis, painless surgery can be performed. People can be made to see things that are not there and not see things that are there. But it is not generally realized, even by professionals, that through hypnosis, parapsychological sensitivity can be enhanced. Frederick Myers in 1901 clearly summarized the major things of hypnosis experimentation in the last century and showed that hypnosis and parapsychology are not necessarily two separate subjects, Myers of 1954. More recently, Beloff, in an analysis of the paranormal, ventures the opinion that hypnotism may not be just a psychological phenomenon, but may have a certain paranormal component to it as well. The points being made here are that hypnosis can involve the paranormal, and the paranormal is being invoked by hypnosis in some of those who take commercial mind training courses, opinions of non-investigators notwithstanding. From the parapsychological viewpoint, the main questions that must be raised about commercial mind training programs are, just by professionals rather than entrepreneurs, what is actually happening to the students in regard to psychological, psychosomatic, parapsychological events and accomplishments? What are the dangers of hypnotic programming for the purpose of enhancing psychic development? What is the level of responsibility of program organizers and associate teachers? What mind training program techniques are safe as well as efficient in bringing a person to a level of psychic development that is not inappropriate for him? What is the most responsible way of presenting mind training program and its various benefit to the public? And 5, how is mind training movement to be regulated in the interest of public welfare? Concerning these questions, the following comments might be made. When people ask for advice about taking commercial mind training courses, we answer that we cannot decide for them. I, for instance, learned a great deal from Professor Lally. The experience was enlightening. Even though there were risks which I did not then recognize, I do not regret the experience. It seems to us that the main problem is to preserve one's own integrity, one's own ethics, one's own sense of values, and to reject the conventional nonsense that if you succeed in developing a psychic power of some kind in a mind training course, you will be able to use it only for the good. According to Eastern tradition, the attainment of psychic powers, siddhis, was for centuries and largely remains a closely guarded secret because such powers, like money, can be used in whatever way one desires. The teacher Alice and I previously spoke of provided a few simple rules which he said tended to ensure human relations and guard against delusion and undesirable psychic involvements. The first focuses on right attitude. Regardless of the attitudes of the other people toward you, your attitude towards them must be right. The point of this is not to just be kind to other people and have them like us. Though this is pleasant, the important issue is to become a karmic. The rule prevents a person from being trapped in automatic cycles of cause and effect. That is, it frees one from karma. We must consciously act rather than react. It is reaction that blocks us from being free agents. If we react rather than act, we are not really choosing. The second of the teacher's rules concerns compassionate non-attachment. In visualizing a specific goal or desired event inside or outside the skin, the creation of an image is followed by the positive statement, may that which is best for me or other persons or group and all mankind come about. This decoupling keeps us from becoming engrossed in our ego involvements and allows unconscious transpersonal sections of ourselves to influence events. Paradoxically, we can work intensely for a specific goal at the same time be detached. What this means is that we can learn to work without needing positive and negative rewards and reinforcements to keep us going and in a good mood. Sometimes the applicant of this rule, compassionate non-attachment, has unexpected consequences. It has been reported by some of the best-known spiritual healers that sometimes when they work for a sick person whose condition has been stationary for a long time, the person suddenly dies. The healers almost always use a non-attached approach to their energy transfer. Yogananda reported an interesting case of this in his autobiography. He had been involved with a sick deer that was trying to heal. He was trying to heal with infusion of psychic energy. Then he had a dream in which the deer came to him and said that he was interfering with its death. To Yogananda, this dream was an important learning experience. He realized that it was presumptuous of him to decide that the deer must be saved. He had formed an emotional attachment to the animal and temporarily had forgotten the yogic tradition of working selflessly without demanding the fruits of work as a fee. A third rule of the teacher involves right consciousness, paraphrased as follows: do not wrestle in darkness, but flood every situation with light. This is a visualization of a beam of white light coming down from the stars like a searchlight. If a so-called negative condition exists internally in one's own nature, then this beam of light, which is thought of as coming from the jewel through the lotus into the personal self, accelerates a change. It tends to incinerate undesirable emotional and mental habits. Chapter 16. What next? Nobel Prize winners in physics and chemistry for 1972 were asked what the awards in their fields would be given for the year 2000. They both simultaneously answered, for the study of man's consciousness. This is the new frontier. Quote, Institute of Noetic Sciences. The dawn of brilliant ethics is shadowed by massive obscurantism rooted in human nature, the refusal to speculate free on limitations of traditional methods. The rejection of any source of evidence is always treason to that ultimate rationalism which urges forward science and philosophy alike. Quote, Alfred North Whitehead. We are at the beginning of a dramatic cultural change, but whether it will come with a traumatic dissolution of old concepts or through a more general evolution of the new cannot yet be determined. Of the many factors that are playing a part, two forces at work in our society are prominent, both stimulated by technology and the priority we have given science in all aspects of our existence. One force is dissatisfaction with our social life. Politics, economics, and ecology, education, medicine, psychology, religion, and with science itself. The other force is renewed belief in humanity, belief that humans are capable of building toward a unified and caring society in which each person has opportunity to become an integrated physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual being, to release the potential for expanded awareness, choice, and change. Many are refusing to accept any longer the image of humans as body only, with all other qualities explainable as nothing but epiphenomena of the physical. There is a promise of a fundamental humanistic change in education from elementary school through the university to include training in self-awareness and self-regulation. In confluent education, heart and mind, emotions and intellect are combined to enrich both. If biofeedback training is added, and students are in touch with their physiological nature, it gives an opportunity for integration of the personality, emotions, mind, and body. If the transpersonal aspects are added, integration of the whole person may ensue. In a way, every branch of science is a specialized map, and a science of consciousness is an attempt at the ultimate map. It inquires into the mind of the map maker. And when we add to science a new psychophysics as part of a science of mind, a science of consciousness, we add a new factor into physics, namely the intercoupling effects of mind and matter. The psychophysics will constitute literally a new dimension in science. It will be at least as map shaking as the change from Ptolemy to Copernicus. or From Newton to Einstein, Harman, 1969. What about contact with extraterrestrial intelligences? Astronomer Stephen Dole has noted that this planet travels in a galaxy that probably contains more than 600 million other Earth-like life-bearing planets. One of Dole's colleagues, Carl Sagan, estimates that at least 1 million of these bear like intelligent life and support advanced civilizations. Sagan, The Cosmic Connection, 1973. And as Isaac Asimov reminds us, there are billions of other galaxies. This life-bearing planets in our galaxy are estimated to be 27 light years apart on the average, approximately 150,000 billion miles, a distance so vast that NASA-type physical vehicles can be ruled out as possible modes for contact. But even in our present rudimentary state of a science of consciousness, it is clear that physical limitations do not properly apply mind to it. If, as previously mentioned, mind is not limited by c, the velocity of light, the limiting velocity for objects that exist in physical time and space, then new possibilities open up in science for communication between us and others in the cosmos. If Sagan and others are right about the likelihood of other advanced civilizations, then we can conclude that we live in the cosmos that contains a network of intelligences. And oddly enough, just as this moment in planetary sense, it seems we are becoming aware of this. If there is a shred of possibility here, what better we can state than to investigate and try to determine the probabilities of interspace contact with selected scientists who already know something from their own experiential base. If such a group found enough data indicating a likelihood of a cosmic connection, even though that likelihood were not large, as computed by National Science of Consciousness Computer Bank, then for our own safety, we should take possibility seriously and look further into the matter. Aside from safety and our innate curiosity, possibly we can tap into a network of intelligences who may have something useful for us that can be determined only if we take rational steps into evaluate data. In other words, whether we regard it from a positive or negative point of view concerning dangers or benefits, we should make an investigation. At least 50 scientists in the United States, Europe, Britain, Japan, India, Australia, and Canada have had sufficient experience and are sufficiently sophisticated in the psychological domain to be able to constitute such a committee. The problem will not be to find committee members, but to obtain funds to begin such investigations, since committee members will presumably already be aware from personal experience and or previously scientific investigation that the mind-matter interaction is real. Their task will be to find the scientific examples of phenomena and report on the data and on their interpretation of scientists at large. If within 2 or 3 years a convincing display were compiled, then we would hope as next step to see a large effort implemented for basic research in a few laboratories. Willis Harman has already initiated planning action along similar lines by calling for both private and national funds for research in consciousness. He proposes that scientists involved in the study of consciousness generate a research blueprint for funding organizations. When, early in 1975, he asked us to comment on and participate in his proposal, we were impressed by the similarity between our own interest in stimulating a new psychophysics and his general proposal. It goes without saying that we want the scientific community to look with favor on these ideas. Returning to Earth, we quote from Chapter 1, we still must send our children to school, pay taxes, earn a living, and do everything else that mundane life depends. These necessities can be leavened, however, by an improved self-image. Not only do we have some powers of self-regulation and self-fulfillment, but we have transpersonal connections that reveal the beauty of an open-ended universe, a stimulating prospect.